So welcome everyone to our first of our lecture series related to the Smithsonian's traveling exhibit, Crossroads, Change in Rural America. It's on display right now in our West Gallery, and I'm Gwen McCausland. I'm the director of the South Dakota Agricultural Heritage Museum, and it is my honor to introduce our speaker tonight. Dr. Tom Isern is a professor of history and university distinguished professor at North Dakota State University. Born and raised on a wheat farm in western Kansas, he has lived all of his life on the plains of Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska, Saskatchewan, and North Dakota. Dr. Isern holds a BA degree from the Bethany College in Kansas, as well as an MA and PhD degrees from Oklahoma State University. Prior to coming to NDSU in 1992, Isern served 11 years on the faculty of Emporia State University, Kansas. Isern's academic specialty is history and folklore of the Great Plains of North America. His research and teaching comprises both of the American plains and the Canadian prairies. His particular interest is in the story of farming, ranching, and rural life on the plains. He is the author or co-author of several books on these subjects, and 3 of them will be for sale after his talk, and he'll be available for any signings. Dr. Isern is also the founding director of NDSU's Center for Heritage Renewal, an applied research and service center devoted to historic preservation and heritage tourism on the Northern Plains. Tom Isern's personal affection for the land and the people of North American plains is evident through his professional devotion to the quality of regional and rural life. Please welcome Dr. Tom Isern.
Look at this, right?
Yep.
Drop that here. Pick the best spot.
Is that good? Sound good?
Picking up all right there?
Yep.
Oh, we're good then. Not going to do the Garth Brooks thing here tonight, huh? Thanks for coming out tonight. A gray day, isn't it? Looks like you at least got a little rain out of it. Well, this deal tonight. Have you had a chance to take a look at the exhibit? Walk through? Give it a walk through if you have the chance. I did earlier this evening. And things you find in there, they maybe sync up fairly well with what I'm going to talk about. I would say that some of them are a little more general, and maybe I'll do a little more specific, a little post-tolling on that. So my subject is, this is rural life, is the subject of the exhibit. I sometimes say, I'm not sure we've got rural life on the Great Plains anymore. We need a new term for it. I know what rural life is. I went to a one-room country school for some years. I remember the card parties in the schoolhouse and the old man knuckle rapping in the pinochle contests. And I remember when home extension units met in the farm homes, And so I touched the hem of that garment. And then, of course, that country school consolidated, and we all went into town. And our 17-year-old teacher got a job in town also at that point. I had the pleasure later of nominating her to the National Teacher of Hall of Fame, to which she gained entry. So I've seen rural life and lived a little bit of it. Then I think about the farm in which I'm still an active partner in western Kansas. Matter of fact, we're buying land just this last summer. Crazy or what? We bought them before the interest rates went up. How are we still operating since 1874? It's because we bought out everybody else. There are no farms within 3 miles of our home place anymore. Okay, so I feel like my lifespan has spanned something to where, what do you call it, urban or rural, and what are those distinctions anymore? I sometimes try to use the word post-rural, but that's so awkward, isn't it? So most of the people who are farm operators in my acquaintance there, or my neighbors in Cass County, North Dakota, or I would venture to say up and down the Great Plains. They're sleeping on the farm, and at least one of the partners in the household is working the farm. But how many times did my brother go to town every day? Ostensibly for parts, of course. Somebody's got to go for parts, but it is always something, isn't it? And the kids go to school in town. The family goes to church in town. All their entertainments are in town. If you're charting this out, it used to be, and I can vaguely remember this, if this is our countryside, and maybe there's a town here, but there are all kinds of social and economic connections that run in a spider web of lines all over the place, neighbors connecting to neighbors directly, and maybe working cattle together. In my grandparents' generation, threshing together, obviously. School board meeting, not in town, but out at that one-room country schoolhouse that my great-grandparents gave the acre for to build the schoolhouse on. There were all these little nodes out in the countryside. Now, all those lines lead to town. And people, okay, so here are a couple of people on farms out here. They meet here in town, and then they go back out here. They never or seldom do this, right? I'm overgeneralizing, of course, but making a point. I don't know we have a word to define this. I was just reading a press release before I dozed off at my room over there, that now the state where I teach, live, and cavort, North Dakota, is now considered 58% urban by the Bureau of the Census, 58% urban. Okay, so what does it mean anymore, right? I think probably there is an interconnection across the landscape that's different from the days that I'm going to describe historically here for a minute. That has passed. And if we're going to talk about rural, it's got to be some redefinition of rural. Now, I didn't mean that to be a depressing proposition, a lost world or something like that, because surely there's another one ahead of us, and that's maybe something to think about. Let me start with a little scene here, all right? And probably I'm going to start with a scene, a canned piece, and at the end with another one. And in between, maybe try to provoke a little discussion. I do a weekly feature for the public radio network in North Dakota. It's called Plains Folk. So I'm in recording every week. It's about life on the plains. Right? History and folklore and food, a lot about food. Maybe pheasants, you just name it. Anything having to do with life on the plains. This was a piece for it. About a particular church which holds a fall supper in October of every year. If that word fall supper doesn't connote something special to you, we'll circle back on that, all right? The first trees came from the Cheyenne River bottom, dug up and replanted here in this holy site by Jacob Wieland. Now row upon row encloses a stucco St. Mary's Catholic Church between Sibley and Daisy, and shades its annual Corpus Christi procession. It's a striking effect to drive in from the sunflower fields of golden autumn, enter the sheltered church grounds, and then descend to the church basement, which is what I did on a late August Saturday, coming to share by kind of an invitation of the late Peggy Wieland in the annual cabbage cutting day at St. Mary's. It's a ritual that precedes by about 1 month the St. Mary's Fall Supper, which features turkey and kraut. I attended the supper the previous year. It was great. You'd never tasted better kraut. It begins here now with 350 pounds of cabbage unloaded from a pickup bed, and an experienced crew of church volunteers. It used to be just about all women, but now it's men and women and girls and boys. 5 sit at the serving counter and begin the processing of the heads. You know the old-time cabbage cutters? That wood ramp-like thing with the slicing blades on it, and boy, that'll take the knuckles off you if you're not careful. Those knuckle busters, they remove the outer leaves and set those aside for a little while for a purpose to come, and they quarter those heads, and then they're running them through the shredder. The quarters then, in the hands of 4 individuals operating those kraut cutters, picked up from farm sales. The big bowls of shredded cabbage go to this woman, Peggy Whelan, who's the boss of the operation, who does the salting. Again and again, she fills a 2-quart measure with cabbage, then adds a spoonful of salt, about a tablespoon. Alternate measures go into each of 2 large rubber trash bins. And bent over each of them are 2 kind of burly fellows pounding that shredded kraut with their fists, right? It's a workout. There's 4 guys, 2 of them over each bin, pounding that cabbage. And now and then they dip out the excess juice, which kind of looks like sea foam, and put that into a bucket so the cabbage will continue to compact in there as they get the juices flowing in it. This goes on a couple hours until the cabbage is all in the cans. And then while some of them visit and have coffee and rolls, the others finish the process by sealing those containers. They put the juice back in with it, and the clean outer leaves are laid on top because there's going to be some spoilage, and who cares if those outer leaves are gone. Then comes the stroke of folk genius. Double garbage bags placed atop the cabbage leaves and tipped over the rims, you see, and then filled slowly with a water hose. They expand, cover the tops of the cans, seal them completely. The kraut cans are left undisturbed in the church basement until the day before the fall supper, about a month later. Commonly, they will say 30 days and 30 nights. It's good if the priest can get around to bless them, but the kraut turns out every year anyway. Saturday is the day, well, the fall supper comes on the first Sunday in October. Saturday is the day the volunteers to show up and cook the kraut. They fry onions in lard. They add kraut to the big pots and thicken it with flour and water, and finally, big chunks of roast pork roasted separately. Now, this is impressive, and it's only one current manifestation of a rich cultural life, a rural life in the parish, formed by Swabian German immigrants in the 1890s. They built their frame church in 1904 and this marvelous stucco church in 1929. They have celebrated Corpus Christi since 1906. Early celebrations featured a male choir and a brass band performing original compositions such as John Whelan's St. Mary's Parade March. Here in the basement, Joe Berger tells me, we used to put on 3-act plays, and John Allman organized and directed them. Now, so often we think then of pioneer life as a matter of deprivation, loneliness, that doesn't match up with the record of places such as St. Mary's. Pioneer life had a complex calendar, it had a vital culture. Cabbage Day and the Fall Supper, yet today, echo that vitality. Now, I like to just imagine the day when Bishop Shanley came to dedicate the church. As told in the county history, it says, all the men of the parish went to meet the bishop at the train at Daisy, some on horseback, some with buggies. Can we recapture even a moment, a remnant of their exhilaration and camaraderie? Well, we'll give it a try. We'll give it a try. What did you notice in that story I just told? Teamwork. How do you organize that? Just like that. You go down in the church basement, everybody's going to their appointed task. How does that happen?
A long period of time, they've specialized.
Yeah. Everybody's got their job, haven't they? Okay? What else do you notice about it?
Pretty simple menu.
Pardon?
Pretty simple menu.
Yeah, well, it's a fairly simple menu. It's not unlike what you might serve to a threshing crew, is it? Something like that. Anything else about it? Please.
Being comrades and working together.
I was out at this same fall supper a couple weeks ago. And the woman I mentioned there, Peggy, has passed away several years ago. Just the first COVID year, she passed away. And I wondered, is it going to hold together anymore? But you know, another middle-aged woman just stepped into her place. And then they backed and filled all around. They got a pretty good depth chart there, it turns out. We might put it that way. Yeah, and the whole thing was just functioning faultlessly. Yeah. But there cannot be even a quarter as many parishioners there as there were in the heyday that I'm talking about here. Cannot be. But they're still pulling it off. And they will feed fall suppers like this. Now, who's been to a fall supper, by the way? You know, the sort of affair that I'm talking to? Anybody been to one this fall? Well, why not? Why not? They're in the papers, or look at the bishops of the Lutheran and Catholic churches, and they'll have notices about them in here. Or just run a Facebook search for Fall Supper, South Dakota, and they'll pop up. It's really a peculiar thing of the Northern Plains. Probably Manitoba and North Dakota are ground zero. South Dakota, western Minnesota, Saskatchewan, maybe not quite as many, but a huge regional enterprise. And people aren't necessarily conscious in their town where they're doing this fall supper. Wait a minute, there's hundreds of these going on every fall. You know, we're part of something really big here, right? So my subject is supposed to be community on the Great Plains. There are various levels of that. Family's one. I do not deprecate family loyalties and connections, but show me the people who don't love their kids. Right. So that's a level that's a type of community that's going to be there. We need to take care of it. We need to nurture it, but that's got a resilience. What else we do. But there are two levels of community I'm mainly concerned with here, which have been kind of well delineated for us by some daughters of South Dakota, by the way. I'm thinking of Dorothy Schweeder of Presho, whose book, Growing Up with the Land, kind of mingles family ties and community ties in a regional setting west of the Missouri. Or likewise, Paula Nelson, who centers on Dakota, a little farther west. After the Westward Was Won is her book, which deals not only then with the strength of community life and the roles of individuals within families, but also broaden up to a sort of a sense of a bigger place. We're part of some place, a larger region. And I think most of all, I didn't bring it in with me. I may have left it on my desk at home, for that matter. Molly Rosam's book. Okay, so I put all these little bibliographies. There'll be a quiz later, you know. Molly Rosam's book, Grasslands Grown. She's with, is it all right to say University of South Dakota here? Nobody's going to spit if I say that, right? Yeah, she's with the University of South Dakota. Wonderful scholar, wonderful woman. Her book, Grasslands Grown, is a true landmark in the literature of our part of the country. And he tells his story. I remember I sat on a dissertation committee at North Carolina and way back in the last century, and the dissertation became this book. And then she was talking about this, I remember somewhere, I think we were at some kind of a fair in Pierre, and she starts telling me about the work she's doing. I said, and she started talking about going barefoot and the importance of going barefoot to the identity of people and being rooted in a particular place. And I said, you're going to have to stop this because you're making me cry. But she has this fantastic reconstruction of childhood on the prairies and how that gives a sense of place in every way you might consider that term. Place in the family, place on the land, place in relation to the relationship to the animals on the farm, domestic and wild. Just an amazing relationship, a web of relationships like that. But then how girls and boys who grew up, and this would be your first, as she puts it, grassland-grown generation, not the old stock immigrants, they're kids who grew up on the land, on the prairies. How over time they began to, and particularly if they went off to college, you know, so they went off to Lincoln or they went off to Vermilion or somewhere, and they began to meet these other bright, shining faces that came from places that maybe they hadn't heard of, but turned out to be kind of similar, and they began to compare experiences, and they found, oh, yeah, it's the same with us. And when you start to then pool those personal experiences into a larger digest, that's when you have something like the Great Plains emerge as a conception. That I live in this place called the Great Plains, or I live in the West River, or whatever. I live in the Big Sioux country. Something larger than your personal identity, a regional identity. And that's the genius of this book, describing that process by which that thing crystallized. Well, so there's a lot we can work with here. My standpoint is, hey, we're sponsored by North Dakota Humanities Council, right? And that's my standpoint here, the humanities. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a social scientist. I do the humanities. I do human affairs. I'm concerned with who we are as people of the land, and that involves the stories, see, the stories that we tell about being people of the land. And I'm an academic who spends way too much time thinking about this stuff, and a farmer actively involved with the family farm in Kansas dating from 1874, and a plainsman through and through. This place where we are, South Dakota, on the Great Plains, is it a hard place to live? Wait a minute, you're the first one to give a response, and it's a counterintuitive one because he said, no, it's not a hard place to live. Go ahead, say something.
I guess, I've lived in South Dakota all my life, so I lived in the country as well. It's easy to know people throughout the country.
So you are grassland grown. Yeah. It's a comfort landscape to you.
Yes.
Yeah. Who else got an answer to this question? Is South Dakota a hard place to live? How old are you?
21.
There you are. Okay. Is South Dakota a hard place to live? In the winter? Look, let me ask, if you were had a cow herd during the winter of 1949 and I asked that question, would you say it's a hard place to live? Yeah, okay, but you're imagining the winter of you know about the winter of 1949? This is the big one.
My parents had pictures of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And they're mostly white, weren't they? That's a picture of the winter of 1949 right there. And they brought those.
And the floods afterwards.
Yeah. And they brought those army weasels out there to try to get to the scattered farmsteads and even whole towns that were cut off from communication. I think about this now and then. I get up on a hell of a winter morning. I've now lived through 300-year floods in the vicinity where I live, and each one of those about 10 feet of snow. And was the cause over the winter was the cause of. But I think about it, and what do? You know, I get up in the morning. I got the propane fireplace there in my home office, and I click down there, and it warms up that space. Later on, I'll click, warm up that space, and the dogs go back and forth between the two fireplaces for a while until it starts to warm up a little bit around the corners of the house. And, oh my word, yeah. When I start to get dressed, I'll sheathe myself in Polar Tech fleece and, you know, all these 21st century fabrics that can get you through a winter. Oh, I'm ready to go to work. Right? I'm not really talking about the auto start element. I'm talking about fuel injection. What a concept. Vehicles that start in the winter. And everybody's got appropriate all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, it seems. And yeah, but not in 1949. Yeah. Now, your impression, it's not a hard place to live. It's gotten to this point. So my students, then, I'll notice in November, pretty soon they're going to start getting edgy. Bunch of them have snowmobiles, right? They want snow to happen. Some of the rest of them are hard water fishermen, and they just can't wait for hard water. What I'm saying is, there was a time when we really feared the winter in this whole part of the country. And when something like rural community, that's a joke in January. It can't happen. Oh yeah, now and then maybe you'll get a nice big high and get a crust and you can get the cutter out and get around. And I know that's the case a century and more ago, that people would socialize in winter. But they remember that. You know why they remember that? Because they couldn't do that just on an everyday basis. You had to have just the right condition. Yeah. So is it a hard place to live? I think the answer is changing on that. We have a tendency to think about this place as being hard and in some ways unattractive. Do you ever find yourself kind of apologizing for the weather or for the conditions here when people come to visit and things like that? Yeah, it is, yeah. You know, why do we do that? Now, the assumption has been in the past too that on the northern plains we are at disadvantage somehow to the rest of the country. You know what I'm talking about? That this is a remote place. It's far from the centers of action, access to capital, high quality entertainment. Does that hold anymore? Pardon?
Not nearly as much.
Certainly not nearly as much. Now, I'm an unfair example because I'm 15 minutes away from Division I university and the amenities of Fargo, which is now considered so terrifically chic and all that sort of stuff. But family all over the place, they're living in a long way from a metropolitan area. I don't see that they're in any way living deprived lives. If they want to go to an NFL game, they'll drive into Denver, Kansas City, or someplace, and they can do that. None of them wants to go to a symphony orchestra concert, but the same would hold there, if they wish to, couldn't they? They can partake of that stuff and be home in time for a Class B basketball game next time that's happening too. Now, so the realities in the 21st century are a lot different. There's some fundamentals that are the same. When that hard front comes in April, you can be sure the calves are going to drop right then, and you're going to have to be in it. But even there, You're going out. You're out there in four-wheel drive. There's still a difference. Now, I don't know what that means for rural life and rural, other than the simple fact of human comfort. I don't know what that means. Then, did the suffering of a hard land prior to our current state levels of technology, did that draw people together, or did it drive them down? I don't have a good answer to that. I have another question. Do we have an identity here? What would be the characteristics of it, of the people of this part of the land?
Are you asking like in how they identify through a particular vision or thinking, or because I would say in this part of the country, and you'll have to repeat this for the camera, is that we identify ethnically, like through ethnicity, especially when it comes to like regional foods. It's not necessarily food you would find in different parts of the state, but it might be Danish, or it might be Lakota, or it might be that type of region, or it's like a kaleidoscope.
For the recording then, Gwen's saying the ethnicity, immigrant status, maybe indigenous status, all these things are in the mix of identity, certainly, right? Please, sir.
Do we identify not just as neighbors, but with people who have helped us or have asked us to help them, or we have come together to help somebody else? Does that help define us?
I believe it does. Where does that happen now? Where does that happen?
It can be neighbors physically, but it can be neighbors ethnically, it can be neighbors ideologically. I mean, to ask elephants and Democrats to help each other right now.
But they nevertheless will, given certain circumstances.
Right here in Brookings.
Pardon?
Democrats and Republicans put aside and help each other where they need to or where they want to.
Does it happen? Huh? Come on, come on.
I don't know if I can take it further, but it's
I think
right
it's a
now.
learned thing.
It's a learn?
From your family background,
Uh-huh.
been raised that way.
Yeah. And you still think that that's a part of the identity of this part of the country, mutual assistance.
And of course, there's exceptions to it.
We got a couple of them, and so one of them is that there's an ethnic diversity within the landscape. There's an ethic of mutual assistance, or whatever that is. Help your neighbors, put it very simply. What else is in the mix?
Hard work.
She's a good worker. She's a good.
The weather affects the same thing. It connects us because it is hard work. If somebody's snowed in, you help your neighbor to shovel them out. You see somebody stuck in the ditch, you try and get them out or help them out. So I think the weather, and we all have that common complaint of, oh, it'd be a nice day if it wasn't so windy.
I never heard that.
And so, shall we say, the rigors of the environment, it provides a common point of reference. It's nothing else. It's something you can cuss about at the cafe. And when you come in cussing, you don't even have to tell them what you're cussing about. But also then it calls forth that spirit of mutual assistance. Anybody throw a tow rope in your vehicle for when you go out in the winter? You know, I found mine out in the shop, you know, that trouble box that I throw in there. I don't think I've had to been towed out for 15 years, but I've towed people out every winter, you know, a particular road I live on. And sometimes I can't get them out, but at least get them out of trouble. Okay, got some other, these are all elements. Anything else in it? Here's one that's not showing up then. Farming. Do we still identify as a farming people? It's part of the country. It's not clicking, is it? Not there. And quite a bit. Okay, my friend Clay Jenkinson, who I like to make fun of because he goes around in tights portraying Thomas Jefferson. And it's a tights. It's kind of, I mean, he's a little long in the tooth for that. But there he goes. But he's been thinking about this same thing, that so much of the past identity has been bound up with that relationship with the land. And that's not clicking with 20-somethings anymore. If there's going to be a rural life, it's not necessarily going to be agricultural. Well, okay, these are kind of sounding out questions. Let me talk about the kind of communities that were planted here. In the first place, recognize that before the ancestors of most all the people in this room arrived in this part of the land, there were communities in place already, right? And there were two main types of communities. There were those of the village farmers, the Earth Lodge people of the Missouri River Valley and other riverine areas, and the types that are described by Buffalo Bird Woman and other authors who write about the Mandan, the Hidatsa, the Arikara, farther south, the Pawnee, Earth Lodge people. They're agricultural people. Anthropologists tended to refer to them as horticultural people, and I think it's a gender thing. You know, I started doing the math from Buffalo Bird Woman's narrative. Wait a minute. She's working 6 acres when I translate the measurements in it. She's working 6 acres. Folks, that's not a garden. That's a farm, by God. And she's doing it with hand tools. Therefore, why don't we call her a farmer? Because it's a woman doing the farming, right? And so it's gardening. Yeah. We have a hard time matching up the vocabulary, but these are impressive agricultural people. And they live in centralized villages. There's nobody who lives out in the country. They all live in a centralized village, do they not? Which we could call a city, because at one time, there were more people, about the time of the late colonial and revolutionary period, there were more people living on the upper Missouri, the Mandan Hidatsa Arikara complex, than there were in Philadelphia. So we can actually call that actual urban life there, but still agricultural life. How does that work? The other general complex, by the time Europeans arrived, is that horse cultures had arisen on the land. And this is sometimes misrepresented, I think. And it's the fault of white guy historians who are fascinated with warfare and with a sort of idealized view of what this is about. When you have to stop and think, okay, how are people making a living? Well, the key element of that is horses, isn't it? The key element for harvesting protein from bison on the landscape is horses. That means Plains Indians are defined more or less by the killing of bison as in by the keeping of horses. A few days in the year, they may be going out there putting bear arrows and spears into bison. Every day of the year, Plains Indians wake up thinking, where are the horses? Where are the horses? Are they okay? Now, what does that make this whole style of life? We've got an urban agricultural community on the Great Plains, which, come to think of it, might be an interesting model, huh? And there's another one, which I would call it a pastoral model, meaning people whose concern and way of life and way of making a living is taking care of animals, generally large animals. This means they're not that different than pastoral peoples in other part of the world, which may not, and I'm not necessarily referring to people of sub-Saharan Africa. I'm talking about open range cattlemen and sheepmen on the northern plains of the United States. I'm talking about the pastoralists of Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa who turned their beasts loose on the land but took care of them. taking care of horses is the defining element in that whole complex that we anthropologists called, more than a century ago, Plains Indian. And it's a pastoral culture. And it's characterized by an itinerant mobility. Nomadic is the wrong term, too. It's itinerant. They move from one place to another and not randomly. Now, there's some strong senses of community there. A sense of place in relation to family and community that would make a whole lot of sense to the people at St. Mary's with their fall supper. Everybody knowing what to do when they get up. Now, those are our pre-European models. Now let's bring the Europeans on the scene, the Euro-Americans. Please.
One thing that came to mind for me with the May 12 storm was the way people came together and helped, but including not just restoring like public parks, gardens, nonprofit parks, gardens, but community gardens, rebuilding.
Mm-hmm.
The cemeteries took a real hit, and we all buried our parents, and then now the trees are gone. And all of these things, are these bringing us together, helping us bond in new ways?
I hope so.
Help in new ways?
The most heroic thing I've ever seen in the area where I've lived the last 30 years, and around Fargo there, was the flood of '97. Because there were no levees or anything like that. It was all sandbag operations. And the way that things would just materialize, you know, we need 150 people at such and such a point, and the calls would go out, and maybe then it'd be on the radio, and people would show up. Okay, we got enough here. Well, where's the next place? And there's like this amorphous mass moving around the urban landscape to where they'd be needed, and the needs for material, and people just showing up with trucks. And the other thing is, all those people on the sandbag line, and I was out there, you know, right? They had tools. All right, now, what we're talking about is that it's like a watershed that had drained into that urban area. It was full of people who were just one generation off the farm. They all had tools. And they might have been out of shape, but they pretty much knew what to do. And you're confirming the same thing in the recent storm. Yeah. These are the sort of things that make us feel somewhat optimistic about our country yet, don't they? Yeah. Well, okay, so this ancestors of the people in this room, basically. How did they set up communities? There's a book on this bibliography by John Hudson called Plains Country Towns. He describes how communities are born here. And that's why this is a thing that does not sync up with the exhibit material here, because there are no Crossroads communities on the Great Plains, or there are almost none. There's a few in the West River. And there are reservation communities that are bona fide crossroad communities. That is, a store happened here and things began to cluster around it. Not the way on the Great Plains. Communities in the Great Plains are founded as railroad towns. Railroad builds through. The inside investors, they either have or purchase land along a line. They send the surveyors out. They lay out the towns. Okay, the railroads mostly all on the Great Plains run east and west, do they not? Going east and west. A town, the geographer's term for this is a T-town. If you're laying out that town, the main neighborhoods are going to be west of the north of the railroad. And turn perpendicular up here, this is Main Street right here. The railroad, Main Street, they make an upside down T, so it's a T-town. Okay, you may come from a town that differs from this, but this is your standard on the Great Plains. Probably along the north side of the railroad here is a street called Broadway or something like it. Now, where I grew up, it was Santa Fe, because it was Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. But Maine still ran north and south. Broadway or something like that. It's a T. Down here, where you're sitting here, you're in the CD district of town. It's low rent residential. disreputable businesses, you know, along here. Right here, there's probably a bank with a corner entrance. And right here, a hotel with a corner entrance. And right here, a depot, because it's already all oriented about the railroad. Am I right about this? This is it, right? We haven't laid this aside, although many of those towns have withered away. Still, when I'm growing up, does the term Dragon Main still mean anything to you? Okay, Dragon Main. Drag Main north and south. And of course, in my recollection, gas was, you know, about 23 cents a gallon, which means on a Friday or Saturday night, you could make 90, 100 circuits up and down Main Street, couldn't you? No problem. And you know, drive by and there are those guys sitting on tailgates in front of Froggies, and they'll wave with their left hands when you go by this way, and their right hands when you go by this way. And you know, they're too lazy even to drag Main, but man, up and down. And then by this time, there'd been a strip development with a Dairy Queen here and other businesses along here. And so you aren't just dragging north and south, but you're dragging an L or sometimes a T, and sometimes sneaking across to Fuzzy's Drive-In across tracks here. But that north-south thing is very important because it lines up young people with the polarity of the earth. And since about the time that you get your driver's license, you're really confused for quite a number of years there. That going back and forth, I argue, is worth the price of gasoline, even in 21st century prices. To line you up, straighten it out. You didn't do that. Sir?
Do we have a new opportunity, at least within the college's community sense, with the rebuilding of the Lincoln Library, to remember what the Negroes just before and after the Civil War and beyond learned to refer to Lincoln as Father Abraham?
Yes.
Because was he a father to them who could lead them from worse to less bad, to maybe not so bad, to maybe a little bit okay, but knowing it would be a hard slog? And can we use the Lincoln Library, the old Pugsley Student Union, to remind us to these generational opportunities that maybe have we not been paying attention to, and encouraging discourse or discussion, sharing, helping?
Indeed. Indeed.
Will you come back when the Lincoln Library is open?
I wouldn't mind a bit. I've even been known to admit in good company that I am a Republican. A Bob Dole Republican, I always say. Yeah. I'd least like to see a whole lot more remembrance of Lincoln in our part of the country, to tell the truth. There's an urban community established, and it's an instant urban community. And you know, everybody knew the rules. The digitization of newspapers that we've had going on here in the 21st century. You know, Chronicling America by the Library of Congress, newspapers.com, and there's a couple other outfits digitizing newspapers and selling subscriptions to their collections. Astonishing. Your capacity to research any part of the regional past in kind of what I call gillnet fashion. You can just drag a net through millions of pages and see what you catch. But one of the things that happens when you start doing that, I've been researching the history of folk song in our part of the country, right? And I've got 50 different versions of Little Old Sod Shanty on the claim, and I know who wrote the original one in 1880 and where his claim was. This is astonishing, but the unexpected part of it, and I'm doing that because I'm really interested in folk song, balladry. But what's coming out of that is I'm starting to understand the whole community climate around the people at that time. Because inevitably, I would start reading the rest of the page, and then back and forth. You know what I'm talking about, anybody who does any kind of research, whether it's family history or what. And I begin to realize, oh geez, these people got game. Now here's what you find in these towns, these T-towns set up all along the part of the country. There's an amazing reservoir of talent that accumulated in every one of them. Some of them have little problems with their dossier. There was a reason why they left Ohio or Pennsylvania. But they were talented nevertheless, and they came out to get that next start. All of a sudden, bang, theatrical companies. I mean, citizen theatrical, not just bringing in companies to play Shakespeare in their local opera house, but they're homegrown theater companies, musical groups and ensembles, literaries. Well, come think now, that kind of takes us into that other group. Okay, but town life was enormously rich in the 1880s and on into the early 1900s. Such, I don't know how people slept. I do not know, because everybody is in everything. Oh, you're at the Masonic Lodge on this night, and the next night you're playing the lead in the play, and the next night, you're organizing the football club. I don't know how they do it. Rural scene, organized differently. In the town, it's the lodges and the women's clubs that are running the town. Masonic, Woodmen of the World, and all the rest of them. In the country, that's that ethnic landscape that Gwen was mentioning. The town is English-speaking Anglo-American folks. The countryside, you go through vast tracts of land and nobody will speak English with you. My neighborhood is all Hanoverian Germans, all of them. It's like the Balkans as you go across the landscape, particularly on the northern plains. Whole districts devoted to a particular ethnic group. And there are some where they mingle and mix, but largely they settle near one another by planting or by accumulating. And their centers are churches, like that St. Mary's, where they had their own brass band, and they had a composer in the congregation composing and scoring music for it, and they had another fella who had taken a course in theater over at North Dakota Agricultural College, and so he's organizing plays in the church basement. They had a baseball team that played other communities. The community was centered on the church. The ethnic neighborhoods, it's church-centered. You'd get baptized there, you'd get married there, you'd get buried there, but everything else happened there. Really, baseball teams for your country churches, and bands, and choirs. And you met your mates for life by that rally, because you needed to have a way that the kids in this church community could meet people of the same faith, but not related to them. and so you sent them off to a youth rally, 20, 40 miles away. That's how my parents met, right? I'm kind of a product of severe inbreeding. I have no ancestors that aren't Hanoverian Germans. But at least, my mother and father came from different communities. Sir?
Did Lawrence Welk and his cousins help bring us together with his wonderful? We came out of World War I not knowing where we were. The 20s was boom and bust, kind of like now, and then the 30s.
What you say is spot on, but you're one war off. It's spot on, but it's one war off. Welk broke into that hotel music market after the Second World War, of course, right? And he found he could get gigs in the major hotels in places like Pittsburgh, Chicago. And the owners of those establishments, they're a little upset with him because he didn't want to front the band. He wanted to direct the band, but he didn't want to get up and talk to people. And they said, Lawrence, you got to come out and talk to the people. Now, what's going on there? He had this accent, and he was embarrassed by it, right? But that's exactly what they wanted. You know why? Because after the Second World War in the 1950s, this was a time, pardon me for speaking in very gendered terms, it was a very gendered time, when a fellow who worked on an assembly line, a working class immigrant guy, could afford to take his wife out for a steak and to dance in one of the hotel ballrooms on a Saturday night. And those were Lawrence's people. And so they wanted him to come out and speak to the people and show them you're one of them. And they knew that would bring them in. And what's happening there is, it's not that. Now, he was doing that a generation earlier in the countryside. And then he took it to the city, and there's a concrete grown generation, like grassland's grown here, a concrete grown generation. They are all ethnic mosaic, just like the countryside is out here.
Well, wealth was post-World War II, but what made me think of it last night at the college strategic planning at the McCrory Gardens, there was a professor who's a New York fellow, and that brought back Tommy Dorsey and the others from before World War II and during.
Yeah.
Could Welk have been what he was in the Midwest but for the big bands in the East Coast?
Oh no, that was his model, but he brought a different packaging to it. That was relatable. You know, it was not upper class, and it's a great American story. But he springs from one of those rural communities on the plains, doesn't he? Now, what happened? These are exceedingly vital and exciting communities, urban and rural on the plains. In the first Dakota boom, the second Dakota boom in the early 20th century, these are going places. This is a rich life. This is the life of my grandparents. Here we go. Here we go. That's my grandpa Alfred, and that's my granduncle Alvin. You notice how they got their chests out, all vainglorious, right? They got the world by the tail. They got the world by the tail in the 19-teens. And they know it. And they were part of one of these rural ethnic communities. And when they went to town, there was a going community there. My mother, coming out of that rural ethnic community all her life, wanted to be a part of that town community. Her lifelong ambition was to join the garden club in town. She wanted to cross into the other community, you see. But she wanted a community. Now, I'm saying that we have a history of really vital, almost instantaneously formed, but highly functional communities on the Great Plains. What the hell happened to them then? What happened to the community that I glimpsed a little bit as a kid? What happened to those communities? Because we may have community there but it's not these. What's become of them? Okay, this is a very common explanation. But I'm going to argue that allows people to execute what they wanted to do. There's something else driving why they would get into that automobile. It's an enabler. How's that? It's not a cause, it's an enabler. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
A little bit later, the military people were drafted, whatever, and many of them they liked someplace else, or they never came.
Did not return.
Back.
Yeah.
Many did to the same location, but so many went elsewhere.
Yeah. And certainly a factor. What else we got going? Anybody grow up on a farm in this group? Okay, got a few people. How come you're not on the farm anymore? You want to tackle that one?
Okay, what?
Why aren't you on the farm anymore?
My brother is taking.
Was it ever considered that you might take over the farm? I bet not. Huh?
Because I was a woman.
Right. The son gets the farm, the daughter gets a suitcase. Go get a nursing certificate or something, right? Or marry well or something like that. I don't know. How many how big is a typical farm family, or town family, but particularly farm family in these ethnic communities in the time I'm describing, the heyday of these pioneer communities and second generation communities on the plains? How big are the families? 7 or 8. Yeah, maybe even more. Jump ahead, say, to 1970 something. And so now, when we're getting the youth of, during the time when people my age, are in school. Yeah. So I'm 70, if that's any clue. All right. What's the size of family by then? Pardon? 4 or 5, and it's going to 2. It's going to the urban model of 2 per family. Now, suppose it's you and a brother who are the 2, and you don't think of girls as being the potential farm operator. At that point, you're down to 1 potential prospect to take over the farm, right? What if he doesn't want to? By God, not everybody wants to be a farmer. Huh? Now, in a previous generation, your solution would be to say to the old man, I feel a calling to serve the Lord. I want to enter the priesthood. And that would be, I kid you not, this is a way of escaping the farm. And for young women, I'm going to enter the holy orders. It was the only conceivable off-ramp in some cases. But you don't have to grab an off-ramp anymore. But what I'm saying is we've had such a diminishment of farm population. Now, automobiles allows people to go farther distance, but is that because of the automobile? 1920s, I can peg this at the Montana Experiment Station. The literature starts coming out on this. They're studying the generation of farming that's taken hold in Montana. And M.L. Wilson and the agricultural economists and rural sociologists said they're not living good lives. Now, I think they're absolutely full of it, but the way they saw it, they were not living good enough lives. And the answer was, see if this sounds familiar, they need to consolidate their operations. They need to have a quarter as many farms and much bigger farms. And at that point, they'll be able to live a more affluent lifestyle and they have a better life. Flash forward to after the Second World War. Same group, agricultural economists, rural sociologists, say we've got a real problem with the quality of life on the Great Plains. People live too far apart. And the social cost of space is making community impossible to sustain. That was a phrase of the time, the social cost of space. Why do we have the social cost of space? Because we consolidate all the farms and there's only a quarter many people living on the land and it's a long way to your labors. Yeah, so in fact we called for a solution to a perceived problem, and then when we implemented that solution we had this other problem. Oh, now we can't live a good life because of this. I'm making an argument for the humanities here, folks. Social sciences are really good like as engineering. They're like engineers to help solve problems. Here's what we need to do. How do we do that? Get yourself a social scientist to help you solve community problems. But they aren't as good as asking the questions. And that is where you need somebody who can understand where communities came from, how they rose and fell, and what their possibilities are, and that there might be other models for things out here that you don't have to invent yourself. Sir?
How do you see us changing now, but T plus 10, T plus 20 years, from Winnipeg to northern Mexico, from the Rockies to the Appalachians, this whole concept of NAFTA, North American Free Trade Alliance, is that bringing us together? Not necessarily easily?
It looked like it was for a while, but I'm not sure that what we've turned the corner on that proposition. We're in an era of renewed economic nationalism now.
Is it social and not just economic?
Okay, let's go with this. Now, there's another element in the answer to what happened to our communities. Having fewer children. Why do you have fewer children? That's a choice. Why did you decide we're only going to have 2 kids? Or maybe not have any kids. Why do you make that choice?
Machinery.
Pardon?
Machinery, the labor isn't needed as much.
Oh, you don't need to produce the labor. Okay, but let's say you're already living in a split-level house in town. And you might, you choose, we're going to have 2 kids and that's all. What's the basis for that decision? Pardon? Cost?
Both
Yeah.
parents work.
Both parents working to support their lifestyle. Yeah. All right, we're talking about choices, lifestyle issues every night. And farm people partake of those same values. By the time you get to the late 20th century, they're making those same choices. In the 1970s and 1980s, all right, years ago, I did the scripting for the 20th century galleries of the South Dakota Historical Museum in Pierre. I was the contractor that did the scripting. And one of the things I said, we need to address why young people left South Dakota in the latter part of the 20th century. And so I went into it, to the good social scientific studies. What do you think was the main, the most cited reason on the part of, say, 18, 21-year-olds for leaving South Dakota?
Income.
Jobs, income?
Received too.
Any others? Well, see the world, right? Yeah. Anything else? Here's the reason most often given by young people in circa 1980. Several studies about that time. My parents told me to. My parents told me to. Now we have this image that, particularly farm folk, they're going to want to keep the kids near, so somebody's got to take over the farm. It's not the case. It's not the case by and large. By and large, when young people left the farm, it was with the sanction and maybe the suggestion of parents. It appears. Now, this doesn't mean might not have been heartbroken farm folk because none of the sons or daughters wanted to take over the farm. But it does mean that that's not the predominant driver here. Now, why wouldn't? Okay, so I'm a weird case. I expect to see the family farm into the 7th generation. And I bring my credit rating to bear to make that happen. Geez, we're buying land last summer. And I believe we were really smart to do it. Oh my word, we're making out like man. This is free land. You know, I didn't put $1 into it. You know, it was all borrowed on land I already owned. Didn't even have to pay for an appraisal on what we were buying, this sort of thing. I can't, you know how crop insurance way, for a landlord, I don't see how you can lose on land. Now you probably can with interest rates jacking up again, but you couldn't then. My wife was skeptical. You're 70 years old, old man, and you're going to sink $250,000 into this, into the farm at this point. And I started showing her the numbers. We can't win on this as landlords. Now my nephew is the operator. We can worry about him, but as landlords, and we're very good landlords, you know, and we can afford to be good landlords because we can't lose money on this deal. Now what was bringing that up? I'm a weird case. Or my mother passed away here, age 98, a few years ago. Opened up the will, and there were 2 of us boys left. Family of 3. See, it was getting to that point where you'd go to the model of 2 families and two kids. Family of 3, 1 brother passed away of cancer before this, so it was us 2. We've got out the safe deposit box. Let's see what's in the will. It says, essentially, you 2 boys work it out between you.
Wonderful.
Now, you're thinking this is just going to blow up, right? But the reality is we'd let it lie in a trust for a couple of years, and then one day during deer season, we got into one of the trucks, spent 90 minutes driving around. You take that quarter. I'll take this one. Okay, move on to the next session. I'll take this quarter. You got down to the last section, got 2 quarters on it, and I settled the last section of it. You take that quarter, which is the better quarter, speaking for production. I'm taking this quarter because I'm going to put a deer stand on it. And I'll be there next January for the doe season again. Now, so non-production values are coming into play there. But I'm the one who's most sentimental that we're going to raise somebody up from my nephew's house full of kids that is going to go to the 7th generation, and I'll live to see that before I go. So I got to take care of myself. Yeah, and I'm the reason there are more cattle on the farm than ever since 1874. I don't need the wheat in the elevator. Buy cows, and see that's working out too. Now, all right, why is this? I'm raising this example because this is atypical. All the neighbors are gone. We're still, and we're farming all their ground. Now that's the dynamic I'm talking about now. This is what became of our communities. This is what became of the rural communities because the schools consolidated out, the churches moved to town, and the home extension groups, if they meet in town too. And then the towns, in the pecking order of the shaking out of that, in that book by Carl Krenzel on that bibliography describes how this takes place. You have certain places that are cities. They remain. It's a North Platte, Nebraska. Would be such a place. Pierre is only because it's only good able of doing that because it's big enough, because it's got the capital, and so it punches above its weight. Rapid City would be another example. You got these, and they're the centers, and you can get cancer surgery there, and pretty much anything you need in life is in those cities. Stretching out from these smaller communities, and it gets down to the one where there's nothing but a grain elevator here, and then nothing but a bar in here, and there's a pecking order of regional cities down to towns that have kept their high school, and then down below that, they better hang on to the bar or nobody's going to come there anymore. You know that pecking order we're talking about. That means not only the rural communities, but the great majority of those town communities that were so dynamic in 1910, they're gone. They're gone. Which brings us to the point. Rural life on the plains, if we can call it rural life. I don't have a word for this. We have to develop a new word for it, because let's picture South Dakota, which got a very darn few cities spangled across the landscape. Those are centers where you can pretty much get anything you need in life. And again, you might go down to a Twins game. Who wants to see the Twins? You might go down to a Vikings game in some years. But otherwise, anything you need, you can get in Rapid City, can't you? Look at it from the eye of God or from a satellite, or like it's a slide of tissue in a microscope. And you see there's these nuclei, and that's Rapid City, that's Jamestown, that's North Platte. Lines lead into that. And then there's a bit of a web there of that next level of town. And then it fades off fast after that. What does what we used to call rural community look like then? How did the patterns work then? What are your loyalties then? Are they to the place where you can get everything? So you start saying, yeah, even though you live 40 miles from Rapid City, and somebody asks you where you are, I'm from Rapid City. Do you? Because without Rapid City, you're toast. You can't get the things you need to live. Do you say you're from Huron? There'd be another example, a regional center like that. Do you say you're from Presho? Is the place maybe where you got a high school affiliation? Is that your locus of the community? Is there something invisible out there in the countryside that are ties that binds that we're not seeing somehow? And I don't want to hear about internet communities. It's not the same. I'm very much active in digital communications, but that's not what I'm talking about. You see what I'm talking about, though, right? Where are your loyalties and your kinships, where you engage in reciprocity when there's an emergency situation that you, by God, will show up and help them because they're your neighbors. They're part of your community. What do you think?
Well, we've got precision ag and all the rest here at many land grants, I'm told, not just the jackrabbit ag people, taking precision ag to look at how the life in the water, the life in the soil, the life in the crops, the life in the livestock actually cooperate and coordinate. So how do we meet increasingly on the web at different websites, for-profit, non-profit, government, whatever, or just on our own, and we share these things on the web rather than face-to-face or over a telephone? And then does that help us come together?
You asking me? I'm pretty skeptical. I'm not sure I'm going to find pallbearers for my coffin that way. Who's got a brilliant idea? How we put the prairies back together now that the building blocks have all passed away and have fallen into centers? Or is that just fine? Are we getting everything we need? I think, okay, this exhibit talking about where the paths we have come down in rural life, I'm positing that maybe that path has reached an area where it may be splintering off, or maybe it's consolidating, or whatever it is. Those paths aren't there. We don't have quite a rural option anymore. We may have a regional option, however. You got to start thinking in terms of, all right, family science has changed a lot as a discipline, right? And the gist of it now is you find your family where you can find it. That may be your blood kin, it may not be. You find your family where you got it. And blended families and the whole mix of it, find your family, you got it. Maybe you find your community where you can find it. But I'm looking for how exactly that happens. I see stirrings of it here and there. There are rural organizations that are kind of under the radar. A big one on the northern plains is, just as an example, doesn't mean everybody should go out and join one, wildlife clubs. These are people who want to maintain some kind of tie to the land. And they're doing kind of very hands-on things, they're trapping and they're releasing pheasants, and all that kind of stuff, because they want to engage in outdoor recreation. But they get together and they have an oyster feed in the fire hall somewhere, and they're driving in from all over the place. I don't know what this is going to look like because I'm a historian. I'm just saying that we don't have the option of rural communities such that my grandparents and parents grew up with, and I started to until it came to an end. And this is the kind of thing to think about. I don't find legislators in your state or mine thinking about this. What's a future quality of life look like given our relationship to one another and our arrangement on the land? But that's what I'm suggesting. And what I'd like is that the best things then would find lodgment in some new pattern. Okay, this will be the closing piece, all right? Every Friday night at 8 o'clock, speaking of the internet connections, and I'm on live, Facebook Live on the Plains Folk Facebook page. Plains Folk is also my weekly radio and newspaper column. And on live, doing Great Plains ballads and folk songs, discovering them, rediscovering them, lost ballads from the 19th and early 20th century. There's a million of them. But I was a folkie in the 1970s, And my hair is about the same length now as it was then. It's COVID hair, you know the phenomenon, right? And I write a fair number of ballads myself and consider myself a part of the tradition that I'm researching. And one of these dates, it's actually 20 years old now, I find, when I look up in my papers. And it has to do with community life at its best. And I used to, in 2002, when this song originated, I was feeling pretty darn positive about life on the Northern Plains. Now, I'm from North Dakota, but no, it's not the oil play. This is before the oil play. But it's at this time, and the same is true in South Dakota, I know, that I would make the wager, you drop me in any town of over 250 people, and I'll find somebody from California there, somebody who moved there. There'd been, the out-migration had not reversed entirely. It was still going on, but that there was compensating in-migration going on. And that's still going on. That churning is still happening today. It gets overwhelmed in the oil patch, of course, but it's still going on in prairie town. And so more towns are actually going to survive than we reckoned a generation ago. And so I was feeling fairly positive about towns and enjoyed being in them. I'm a little less sanguine today. There are political divisions out there that are coming between neighbors. There are racial divisions that are coming between neighbors. In your state and mine, there are definite cleavages between indigenous peoples and the Euro-American population of the land. And until a few years ago, like most Euro-American descendants of settler stock, I thought, well, it's getting better, isn't it? Yeah, it's getting better. And I worked commonly with tribal historians and on joint endeavors and this sort of stuff. And I found that I got along pretty well working with groups on the res because I was old, and that meant I sat with the elders. Young guys couldn't do that, what I found. But being an elder of my people with a bunch of titles, and I sat in here. I found myself in a meeting of Dakota historians, and they sat me down in a bunch of old Oglalas. And Oglalas really don't take any crap. But on the other hand, they're all my age and older. And so that sort of a community emerges there that was age-based. But white guy native relations are at a new low for the past generation in North and South Dakota. I have no doubt of this. Relationships within our towns are strained. There are people who are scheduling around one another on holidays. Yeah, don't tell me it's not happening. If it's not happening in your family, good, because it isn't mine. And COVID kind of drove that too. I'm not going in with that bunch. They're not vaccinated, or I'm not going in with that bunch because they're going to preach to me about vaccine. Lay it aside, folks. Well, so I'm less sanguine about community on the Great Plains today. And I'm looking for answers. But I know what it looked like when it was really good. I better get the words out because I am old. Now the windows all are dark, but inside there's a glow. Trucks pull up and idle, and they let the heaters blow. At last the neon lights, and the bolt clicks in the door. It's cold outside. At the Cenex coffee clutch, that's where the day begins. Caramel rolls and coffee, and confessing all our sins. The men sit on the left, the women on the right. Barbed wire between, 'cause it's a prairie town. In the morning, Prairie town doesn't change much sun to sun. We start out here in the blue-gray of morning. Heaven knows where we'll be when day is done. Heaven knows where we'll be when day is done. Now it's not the kind of place where you order a Chardonnay. The beers are all domestic and the whiskey's just okay, but we got 7 kinds of schnapps, try a new one every day. And that's our bar. We've got the kind of bar that you can take your granny to find some conversation and some pinochle too. Come Saturday night when you're putting away the brew, don't drive your car, 'cause it's a prairie town.